recorded. This meeting is being held both in person and virtually through Zoom pursuant to Governor Baker extending the COVID-19 rules, allowing public meetings to be conducted remotely so that board and committee members as well as members of the public can participate remotely. Moving down the list, the first item is public comment. Is there anybody here for public comment for an item that is not on the agenda? All right, moving on to minutes approval. I did not see a set of minutes get dropped into the folder.
I didn't see any either.
So we'll move forward on that. New business, introduction to new land use clerk. We have a new land use coordinator. It is Mark Kresge. He has a significant amount of experience working with planning boards, working with conservation commissions. He actually worked for DCR for a fairly long period of time. And he has a ton of awesome experience and I believe will be super, super helpful for us. The job has been split, so now the land use position, at least the portion that Mark's doing, is just going to be us, the ZBA, and Concom, I believe it is. So hopefully we'll have somebody who's being pulled in less directions that does have some specialized experience to help us keep many of these things organized. Now, historically, we have appointed the land use coordinator as the clerk for this board. For a couple of reasons. It makes it easier for them to do their job, and they also keep track of our minutes for us as the clerk. So if we would like to continue that forward as a tradition, I would like to see if somebody would like to make a motion to appoint Mark Kresge as the clerk of the planning board.
I, Francois Steiger, at this point in time would like to present a motion, which is to appoint Mark Kresge as the clerk for the planning board.
I will second that motion.
Here in a first and a second, any discussion? Hearing no discussion, I'd like to call a vote.
Steiger, aye.
Denalia, aye.
Liddell, aye.
Monroe, aye. Excellent. I will be sure to let Mark know. I'm very much looking forward to his help in the future. He's already been a tremendous help, so it's only gonna get better. Moving further on the agenda, we have the continued discussion on the request for minor change for 69 Gardner Road. To refresh everybody's recollection on this, Mr. Schmidt had come in and he had requested that that we modify how his restriction is measured, specifically that we look at it from a weekly basis, but then still put in a daily cap, so it'll be a weekly cap of 35,000 gallons, which is consistent with what it was previously, and then a $10,000 gallon not to exceed,
On a given day.
on a given day, but he would still be capped at the 35,000 per week.
Per week.
And water usage is something that he's required to track by the CCC, so there is a real number reader on it. As evidence, he introduced to us a letter from an engineer, which we requested to have dated and stamped. And he wasn't able to get that to us until immediately before the meeting, so we didn't have a chance to review it to make any kind of decision on it. Mr. Schmidt is not here tonight. Nobody here is a representative of Mr. Schmidt, correct? Okay. And we have no representative for him here tonight, but it is a minor change, and he did present evidence on it at the last meeting.
I just have a question, which is, do minor engineering changes require posting and notice to neighbors?
So, looking at the rule, it was, I believe, substantial requires the notice.
Is that right? So we would not have to have a hearing to do this? Okay,
That's the point of the minor, yeah.
I know, but I'm just clarifying it.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, it's ultimately up to us as a planning board to determine whether it's minor or something else. So if the board does not feel it's a minor change, we should discuss that.
one more question, and that is that when he made this request originally, Mr. Murray asked to have a letter from his, water expert, which is what he submitted.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you've had a chance to see it?
Oh, sure.
You have?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So his expert is the guy I hire, to assist us in water supply issues, so while we can address it generally, he's a grade above us in the understanding of the geohydrologic process. And if he says it's good and there's no risk, then we don't think we can gainsay him.
I think it was well explained and we could vote on it tonight, but that's just my opinion.
Right, would somebody like to make a motion?
I was gonna try to find the report.
Okay.
It is in the Google Drive?
From last meeting, right?
No, it's actually a copy
It's
of it.
in this meeting too, because we needed to update with the stamped version.
In the documents tonight?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep, it's in the documents for tonight,
It's under
under
P.
69
I was just gonna in
Gardner
the
Road water issue.
Okay. Maybe somebody who's more proficient at finding things should make that motion. I would refer to that letter. Maybe I can find it. Under correspondence?
No, it's under the meeting
Go
for
back one.
tonight. And then 69 Gardner Road water
Oh,
issue.
okay.
And then I think the top one.
Top one. Letter regarding water usage.
Yeah.
Yes.
Attached is
from
the letter.
Proventure Engineering.
Right.
I'm saying that right. Okay, so I'll make a motion that we approve that with, let's see. That for the water, that we approve, who is the petitioner here? I know it's Mr. Damon, but Royal Sun Farms request to alter the distribution of water requirements contained in the special permit, as, set forth by Mr. Proventure in his letter of, I can open it, August 11th, 2022.
Do I have a second?
I will second that motion.
Here in a first and a second, any further discussion?
Lived all eye,
Alright, calling a vote.
lived all eye.
Amelia, aye.
Schneider, aye?
Monroe, aye.
Eye.
Yep, and it is a special
Right.
permit, so yes. Yep. Alright, so I will ask, Mark to draft up a letter similar to what we've done for the other minor changes and confirm the vote that we had in the letter and send it to the applicant.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Can he copy me on that?
Absolutely. Alright, moving down the list here, we are on to continuation of public hearing regarding 14 Main Street. The Town of Hubbardston Planning Board is continuing the public hearing to consider the application for special permit for the planning board to construct a cell tower in Hubbardston. The applicant is Vertex Towers LLC. The proposed tower is to be located at 14 Main Street, Hubbardston, with access via 7 Brigham Street and 9 Brigham Street. And I'd like to invite Carolyn up to the table. And let's see. And Mr. Murray. Care to join the table? Here's a paper copy. And here is a paper copy of the most recent version from Mr. Murray.
I got one.
I had some comments from Carol.
I don't have
so, All right, so,
Mr. Chairman, do you have one more? Because I think you said that after I was already en route. If not, I'll.
yes, we definitely do here somewhere.
You know what, I'll share with Mr. Demaria, and,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So that I am not left alone. Thank you.
So, what this version represents is, we've been attempting to narrow down some of the issues, and we had asked the applicant at the last meeting to send us a list of places where he either, objected to the language or to propose alternative language. I made a pass through this, then Alice made a pass through it, and town council has also made a pass through. We have some changes from where we're at, and we're gonna run through it. So what my plan here is to actually just read through the last 2.5 pages, and
Running page.
hopefully have it not take all that long. But we'll see. It's a half hour to get through the first paragraph last week, but ideally, we refine the issues a lot. From a discussion standpoint, I would like to, we had left off at 8, underneath, conditions of special permit and site plan. That is on page 11. My preference would be to come back to 8, because our discussion on some of the other points is gonna sort out who's doing what, and I think that has a lot of an impact onto the engagement that we're asking Mr. Murray for. So if we're putting in not to exceed numbers, I think we all need to be on the same page on what the work is, so that we're not asking anybody to do anything unreasonable, and we're asking to have enough money set aside. So, unless somebody on the board objects, I would like to come back to that after we run through these other items. I did also have a phone call, with our new building commissioner, Duffy, and let him know what was going on and what we are working on here, and he said, he was not able to attend this evening. He is, obviously happy to be involved. And he will attend our next meeting, in person in order to introduce himself to the board and talk about how we all can work together in the future. He goes by Duffy, and that's what he has on his message, but that's not his name. His name is, it's Bob, let me find it here, just so we have it on the record. It is Robert Lanciani. But he prefers to be called Duffy.
Makes sense.
I didn't ask why, but he sounded really great. I look forward to working with him. He seemed friendly, approachable, and well-versed, and has worked in a bunch of different communities of different sizes. So he is well about the ways. So let's jump into it with item 10 here. Excuse me, 9. So this is a place where I think we do have some questions, but I'll just read it first and we'll discuss it.
Mr. Chair, if I
Yes.
might ask one question before we get to 9. Number 1, which we had talked about previously, was a condition of approval. It's 2 different conditions. One, that we produce a check, and that was supposed to have gotten sent to Town Hall today. And I didn't know whether it got to the planning board yet. I was hoping you got it. It was received by Town Hall. I didn't know
have-
whether you got it.
I have not been notified of it.
Okay. It was delivered FedEx, it came directly from the bookkeeper.
Okay. Yeah, no, I didn't hear from Lori or from Mark on it. Mark's schedule is not full-time, it is regular though. I don't remember if he was in today though. So, no, I don't know, I guess is the
It's
short
in town
answer.
hall, so.
Okay.
And it was just, we had to do it within 14 days of the decision, we did it in advance. The second issue is, the calculations must be reviewed by places and approved by the planning board. In anticipation of that condition, places actually did review the drainage calculations. They issued some comments and our engineer has responded. So I just wanna confirm that we're all set with them. I have a copy of the response that we provided to places about a week or so ago. I know the engineer was gonna reach out to Mr. Murray to make sure that he was all set, but I don't know where we are. It might be done, is what I'm saying. I just wanna see whether it's done or not done.
Okay, Mr.
It
Mayor?
is done. We just haven't had the opportunity to write a concluding letter. We found that there are calculations to be reasonable and accurate as revised.
Okay.
So the process was, we reached out to them, they gave us their original, we had a couple of very small comments, and they responded. And as far as we're concerned, the drainage calculations were more than adequately prepared. But we will provide the board a letter in writing saying that.
I have, Mr. Murray asked for a few more things,
Mhm.
and we submitted them, and I have them here for the record if you want them in the record.
Yes.
So I only printed out 3 copies, cause it's a lot of engineering mumbo jumbo, but there are 3 copies.
Okay. If anybody's particularly passion for a paper copy?
I haven't seen any of that, I don't think.
Okay.
That's what they sent you like a couple weeks ago.
Who sent that to me?
The engineer did.
Oh. This is only what the engineer sent me?
Exactly, it was like it was like a letter and then a whole lot of attachments.
Okay, then I have seen that.
Yeah, okay, sure. And then the last question is, one of the documents in there is an additional sheet to the site plans. I think, places asked for some more erosion control, and we did it. So on page, 3, there's a list of the plans that you're approving as site plan review, and it might be prudent to add that to this list.
So, Mr. Perez, I'm sorry, but is this is it page 3 from this deck that you provided us today?
It's, yes,
Revised drainage area, peak runoff rates and volumes at the southern,
no, it was page 3 on the decision. Which, the chairman has it right now, it's probably page 5 of the package.
This one?
Yeah. There was just some more drainage detail that the places asked for, and we complied with.
And I'd like to suggest we put a placeholder, new number 22, which would be places associates sign off on the drainage. I'll get that, I'll have that emailed tomorrow.
So I'm actually gonna suggest that that be 23 and that 22 be, so this is under documents, so that 22 be, supplement number 4.
Yes.
So that'll be up in the document sections.
Correct. And then underneath 24, the plans,
Yep.
I would add up number 9, and you just gotta, whatever the title is there.
I think that's the best.
And you gotta also include the date on it, because that's the date after July 1st.
Infiltration, trench drainage system plan?
Yes, exactly, and there's gonna be a date associated with that.
What's it called again?
I don't think we have that copy here.
Yeah, I was just
Sure.
looking at
What?
Is that this?
Oh, they're not there, we just,
under documents right at the beginning on page 3, they're saying add 22.
Oh.
yeah, we're gonna add 22, which is gonna be
Gotcha.
supplement number 4, and add 23, which replaces sign off on drainage.
Got it now?
Is this the
Thank
new
you.
one?
Yeah, this
Is that what he's referring to,
This
the
is the new
plan?
plan.
Yeah.
Mhm. That we just-
Infiltration trench drainage system.
Yes, exactly.
It's gonna replace the existing one that we had already.
Add to.
But it's, that's the number 9, right?
That's
So
number
we-
9 under plans.
Yeah, we are adding number 9 under plans, infiltration trench drainage system plan.
Right, and I think you need to say dated.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna look for.
9/14/22. 9/14/22.
Right.
So then do you wanna modify number 1 too, to say it's been provided in conditions?
So you're saying number 1 under conditions of special permit and site plan?
Yes.
You have proposed language for the modification?
Right, you could just add at the end, this condition has been satisfied, I think, couldn't you?
Well,
Or do you just strike it?
Or you can strike the condition.
Yeah.
Cleaner.
yeah, I guess we strike it.
Sort of cleaner.
So then that will cause a numbering shift, but we'll look at that in post-production.
Yeah, 'cause referencing that tonight would be a nightmare.
Alright, so that takes us back to number 9, unless anybody has anything else.
Christopher, one quick thing.
Yep.
Is under 2, right under where we just X'd out, the 7 should be 9 Brigham Road. The Altos property is 9, not 7.
Okay.
Good catch. Isn't it actually both of them?
Yeah, I
It
would-
actually should be both, the
Yeah.
right way to do it, the access easement over the Olson and Alto properties at 7-9, 7 and 9 maybe,
Yeah.
Brigham Street.
Okay,
Number 9?
number 9.
Number 9. Right, so this there was some discussion about, because, we had some of our template language, Mr. Parisi had suggested some other language. I still have some questions about this one, because, the applicant had suggested a construction control affidavit. I didn't find that as a thing, but it appears there's a construction control document. Is that perhaps what you
Yeah,
meant, or?
It's a multi-step process. I thought we file an affidavit with the building inspector that says that, our engineer will monitor the construction process in accordance with the plans. And then they, produce several other documents during the process, as well as a final sign-off. So, is Tom Johnson on the Zoom call?
Oh, he is, and it looks like he just put his hand up. Let him
Yeah.
promote him. All right, he should be able to speak.
Hi, good evening. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes, mostly. Let me turn up
Speak,
everything.
speak loudly, Tom, but yes.
Okay, great, yeah, Fran, just like you explained it, that's the process. process. There's an initial affidavit that's filed with the building permit, application. And then, there are routine inspection reports that are provided along during the course of construction. And then a final sign off and affidavit that the work has been completed in accordance with the approved plans.
So the document is called an affidavit, correct?
We call it the construction control process through the building code. Potentially find a more detailed reference if you'd like.
Okay. So,
Applicant shall comply with the construction control process,
In compliance with Massachusetts law.
and then his reference.
Mr. Merritt?
So this is the controlled construction requirements under the Massachusetts State Building Code. It's not under your zoning.
Right.
It is, well, obviously a building permit must comply to zoning. It is not a site-related document. We do this all the time for construction when we do public buildings or any building of any kind where you have a complex system. Let's say we're building a school. A building inspector doesn't have the knowledge of the structural engineering components of a school to be able to critique what the engineer has done. So the engineer stands in his stead, does the inspection. That in no way prevents the building inspector from doing any inspection that he wants at any time. It's just belt and suspenders for the building inspector. So I don't agree that what they're proposing addresses the concerns that the planning board routinely has during a site construction operation. The building inspector is not an expert at site construction, erosion controls, and those kind of things, which is what we are trying to address when my office says we wanna visit the site, make sure that the erosion controls are maintained and everything else. And then they're gonna say, in all likelihood, well, we have the US EPA NPDS permit, and that requires inspection, but again, that's not the town of Hubbardston. The US EPA is an independent jurisdictional agency and their regulations are different from the town of Hubbardston. So I keep asserting that they're mixing and matching, and I don't agree that it's an appropriate comparison. If, let's use the self-storage facility. I drive by it on a regular basis. When we have an intense rainfall, the morning after the rainfall, I drive by it in the morning. If we have an intense rainfall during the course of the day, I drive by it on my way home. And these are the kind of inspections that we do to make sure that our roads aren't impacted and that construction's not gonna impact anything environmentally sensitive. So that's why I keep saying that I believe these minor inspections and reports that I do are worthwhile for the benefit of the planning board, and they don't step on the building inspector's toes at all.
I might add a couple of thoughts to that. Just on the NIPD's process there.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Sure, yeah. As part of that EPA filing, there's a detailed checklist for erosion controls, which stipulate pretty clearly who, where, and when the erosion controls need to be inspected and reports need to be prepared. So it's because it's as detailed as including how much of a rainfall event and how quickly after that rainfall event the erosion controls need to be inspected, and then who's responsible as part of that permit to do that inspection, and who's on the hook to make sure they make those repairs. So there's while it may be an independent process from the town of Hubbardston, there's a very detailed process that's in place as part of this. So to whether we need to have two folks doing the same inspection on the same erosion controls, in my opinion, is a redundant effort.
Before I come back to you, Bill, I just wanted to look for thoughts from the board and from town council.
I'd like to hear first from Mr. Murray personally, in
Okay.
terms of a response to what was just said.
Okay.
Sure.
Go ahead, please.
We do this I'm on the other side of the table more times than I'm on the review side of the table. And it is very common that an agent of the planning board or an agent of the conservation commission or both visits the site on a regular basis, regardless of the NPDS. The NPDS, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System by the US EPA, is a self-monitoring system and a self-reporting system. So you can see that intrinsically there is some self-interest in there where contractors take care of it. It's not a reportable situation, and sometimes they don't take care of it. So while I agree that they're supposed to do it, it's not always 100%.
Can I add just one more thought there as well?
Yes.
The way that Vertex typically handles that is that, in some cases, if it's a big project, they put that, NIPD's filing onto the contractor to, take care of that filing and then be responsible for it. The way that, Vertex handles that is they have my office prepare that, that NIPD's report, prepare that filing, and then, there's a process where the contractor, becomes responsible and the owner becomes responsible. But it's an inspection checklist and report that's prepared by a professional engineer, and then we also oversee it as part of the construction process. So we are an independent, in this case, it's not just the contractor keeping an eye on the contractor. The way Vertex handles these projects is they engage my firm to also be part of that, because as Mr. Murray has suggested, it's a little bit about a chicken or in-house there. But in this case, we're already involved as this, the engineer of record for the project and engaged as the, to keep an eye on those inspections. Perhaps one condition that the board might consider would be to receive during the course of construction, be copied and receive a copy of those routine NIPD's erosion control inspection reports, which is what I believe that the goal is here, is to make sure that you're keeping an eye on the fact that construction is proceeding and that there's not gonna be any detriment to the town roads as a result. I think that we're talking about very similar, almost identical reports here by a couple of different outfits. My point is, it's being done by, it could be provided to you as a condition of approval, if that's something that we would consider.
So,
I'm looking at the zoning bylaw, and the zoning bylaw says the building inspector will not grant an occupancy permit until he and the planning board receive a construction control certificate. And that's what Mass law provides, and your zoning bylaw provides. And so we're just trying to eliminate a unnecessary review process.
So there are two separate items. I think folks understand that. There's the building permit, the construction control process, part of that, which, a lot of that is focused on the foundation and the subgrade preparation. But as part of that, we also, it's a belt and suspenders, we're also looking at the erosion control as part of our site visit there. We're there, looking at all of those other things anyways. But there's the construction control piece, and then there's also this EPA piece process. And that process has been established just for these types of projects, for projects that are over an acre of disturbance. The EPA has put this in place to protect exactly what you're looking to have protected.
One final comment, promise. This has been a requirement of every single special permit that the planning board or their agent visit the site on a regular basis since I've been reviewing for the planning board.
Yeah.
It's a precedent that you've set, and you've utilized it many times for many reasons to prevent a problem. I don't believe that this project is unique in any shape or form. I actually think that this project being on the top of a hill with construction coming down the side of a hill warrants extra vigilance.
I think you bring a very good point, and Brigham Street has been notorious for being problematic when it comes to runoffs. And as a result of that, we've had near misses and accidents that have occurred there as a result of this here. So I hear your concern loud and clear, and I think from that perspective, I tend to think that, yes, I understand that there is the notion that you can do some self-monitoring. There is, however, some expert knowledge that we have within the board, and very specifically Brigham Street, as was stated earlier, is extremely problematic street and is a very heavy transited street, not only by our individuals, but we also have pedestrians that do come up and down every so often there. So I personally think that there is some merit in what has been presented by Mr. Murray.
Just my final comment here, the overall scope here is a 12-foot wide gravel driveway, following an edge of a 8 feet. If, for example, there was an event that washed some of that gravel, there's a large vegetative buffer between any point of wash and the road in this case. There's also a whole number of design features that have been put in place to prevent that from happening. So, yes, the overall number exceeds an acre, but it's a long, linear, 12-foot wide project through a field. So, we do all sorts of development and all sorts of land disturbance projects. Large Home Depot, something like that, opens a large area. In this case, I wouldn't classify it as a high, a project with a high likelihood for an issue, or a project that would warrant, multiple looks at the same.
Just to respond quickly to this here, I mean, I don't think that this is a large project from your point, and I think, yes, you are doing what is required from your perspective. I'm gonna ask Mr. Murray, I mean, based on your experience and what is actually going to be presented here as a project, under normal circumstances, what do you think is the requirement here? Is it an owner's requirement? And I know you're prejudiced when you're looking at it from your perspective, but, I mean, what is it? Is going in, taking a quick look, and coming back, or is it a really full in-depth assessment every time you go out there?
No, it's a very quick look and either an email or a phone call to say, hey, the erosion controls are down, and
Yep.
if we get another big rain after that big rain, we're gonna have a problem.
Okay.
I've recently
And I
done
would
that
ass-
up at the self-storage.
And I would assume that they may have exactly the same conclusion, correct?
They may or may not, but,
I understand, but it is, I mean, if they're doing their job, they would come up with the same conclusion.
we would hope so.
We would, yeah, exactly, okay.
Else?
The question, so this was handed out, I don't know whether Ms. Parisi's seen it. It would be, I guess you asked,
Yeah, it's in the packet.
Um,
So
Bill Murray for,
we asked Bill for the not to exceed numbers at the last meeting, and
so this would include everything that you believe you would need to do to supervise this project,
Assuming there are no stumbles, yeah,
the checkoffs, basically.
right.
And the reviews. Okay, so this is a total that
Yeah.
adds up, if my math is right, $3,800. And would include complete coordination for drafting special permit site plan,
Which is tonight.
which is, we also have town council here that's been a big help on that, so maybe it would help us to know where the division of labor would be on that.
And wasn't that included in the $4,000 that we already paid?
No, that was the drainage review.
And then we have the project kickoff meeting, so that was be $700 to finish this, which is, somebody's gonna get paid to help us finish this as a planning board. There has to be
Bill, do
the
you know-
final drafting, the final compliance with recording and so forth, right? Would this include, this wouldn't include the recording fee, but it would record getting it ready?
I don't record it, they record it, but this is my attendance tonight and any coordination that goes with it.
Okay.
The 700 is
So-
essentially tonight and the coordination around finalizing this permit.
The document,
So-
okay. And then you have a project kickoff meeting, which would be with whom?
The contractor and Vertex, and their engineer in all likelihood.
Okay, and then the erosion control reviews, which is what we've been talking about here.
That's a separate meeting. So the kickoff meeting is, hi, my name's Bill, here I am, this is what we expect from you. When I show up to the site, I'm gonna check in with you always and every single time, and they haven't done anything. The next one is the erosion control, so they establish erosion controls prior to construction. I take a look at them to make sure that it all seems reasonable, and this is about as boilerplate as we get. Then during the duration of the construction, I suspect 4 meetings after big storms. Drive up to the site, take a look, take pictures, and send an email or a report. Can't remember some of the rest of it.
Closeout review.
Project closeout review, that's where we take the special permit, we go line by line, my office does, to make sure everything is as complete as it can be. We issue the report, and then I sit in front of you one more time at the very, very end to say I concur that they've done everything that they said that they were gonna do. And the meeting and numbers D through E aren't just sitting here or sitting in a space, it's also coordination with their engineer and everybody else.
So, do you know where you're on track for landing with the estimate for the drainage calculations?
We're well under budget.
Yeah, because that was done, like we had discussed, that was set as a not to exceed number. So I guess really 9 pulls us into number 8, as it is. So, we need help with some of this stuff.
I understand that, and I think the town has been struggling with the fact that it didn't have a building inspector. I heard mention that there's a new and very experienced guy today.
I'm gonna ask you to let me finish that, cause you did cut me off. So, there is some solution here, I'm sure we can all be okay with. And just to go through what happened here, to make sure we're all on the same stage of remembering. We had done the completeness review, we were then moving into the review phase, and then that was when you received that proposal. When you received that proposal, you objected to the fee. As a result, we went out and we ran an RFP process. And from the RFP process, we didn't get anybody back who was willing to put the work for us. Then we started meeting, and we started working through these things. In that time period, there was roughly, there was a proposal for that review period that was done for the drafting of the special permit. That special permit subsequently got drafted by members of this board, at great expense of time, and great expense of patience. And I know I am speaking for myself, but I'm sure other members of the board feel the same way. We're hidden about the bottom of the tank on what we're willing to do. We need to just vote this one way or another, and pass it off to the professionals and be done with this and move on with our lives. So, we need to compromise.
I completely agree with that. I've done this in front of well more than dozens of planning boards and site plan review, and equally challenging and sometimes more challenging. And quite frankly, if the planning board were to vote tonight, in my experience, that's the last time the planning board gets involved. And what happens is, it then goes to the building inspector. And all these things, site visits, and I don't get involved. Hopefully you'll never see me again. And I have never been back to a planning board post-decision. And now, but I've gotta come to planning board meetings, kickoffs, and construction closeouts, and those are all issues that are done at the building inspector. And I understand you guys have had issues with your building inspector, and I understand you've got a new one now. We're still quite a ways away from being ready to do any of these tasks, and I'm sure your building inspector will be up to speed. I'm trying to get you out of the loop too, and I don't wanna be involved. but the more we have to come back, and, this is the way it's done on every construction project we've ever done. And the building inspector has authority under, mass law. There's the state building code that he's required to interpret, and, these aren't very difficult sites. If you wanna go, there's a site in town that, I don't know if Mr. Places has been, or Mr. Murray has been by, but there had to have been inspections last week, and because they poured a foundation last week. And so, and these are things that the building inspector does very routinely. And all I'm trying to do is put a cap on the fees, because then it becomes discretionary. And you know what, I hate to say it, and I'm sure I'm gonna regret saying it, but I heard the word self-interest, accusing our engineers of being self-interested, when we have another engineer who's equally self-interested. And, so, I would say every one of those tasks there are to be performed by a building inspector at the town's expense. Or if the planning board wants to get involved, they can do it at their expense. But why should it be at our expense? We've already, paid for professionals. I completely recognize that you drafted a decision. But, to be perfectly honest, that happens at every planning board meeting that we go to. I recognize the effort, I recognize the desire to get this all done, but, there's gotta be some cap on the fees that we pay. And we paid application fees to the planning board, we've paid all the expenses that they've asked us to do so far that we've agreed upon, and I'm just going to put a cap on it. Something, that we're not coming back and saying, okay, we need 4 more inspections, and it rained last night, we gotta go back to something. This is a 6-week construction process, so yes, there'll be rain during the process, but it's not a situation where someone's have to go back every time, and that's what a building inspector does.
Town council, is there some guidance you can give us on these issues?
Yes, I'd be happy to. In my experience, every special permit has some component of independent monitoring inspections on behalf of the town. Whether that some of those might be performed by the building inspector, or some of those might be performed by a peer review consultant, it's pretty common. You also have to remember, this is your special permit. And these are conditions that you decide you wanna put in. And you're right, this is not something that the planning board, you should not be involved with most of these next phases of the project. And whether or not your building inspector is capable of doing some of this, I'm sure he is. But I'm also sure that there are certain things that are going to fall slightly out of his wheelhouse, and that you would ordinarily look to someone like Places Associates to fill in those gaps. So I think it comes down to you deciding, at what point do we feel we've got a gap between, say, the building inspector's capabilities and the need of outside consultants. Because to me, it doesn't really matter whether it's a cell tower project or whether we're talking about a residential subdivision. There's always some agent on behalf of the town reviewing, inspecting, showing up on site, interacting with the general contractor. And if we haven't had a full-time building inspector, and I don't know what the role is going to be of this building inspector, how many hours you're going to get out of them going forward, maybe there's some happy medium in between, where there's a mixture between the two roles.
Speaking as a member personally, and not as the board, there is certainly some amount of support that the building inspector will need, and there is some amount of stuff that should go to the building inspector, because we should be asking some of these things of our building inspector. But I don't think that means that there's no place where Places is gonna be where I don't think that it is I don't think it's a valid argument that there's no place where Places Associates will not be helpful to either the board or the building inspector down the road. So, my suggestion would be is that we come to some kind of agreement here not to exceed number. We in this version of this document did push a significant amount of things that were originally gonna go to our consultant, to the building inspector. So I believe that is going to help keep the costs down. Frankly, from a procedural standpoint, I'm tempted that we just add a not to exceed number, but hopefully it's one that we agree with. If we can't agree to it, we'll just stick ours and we can argue it after the fact if you want, assuming the board votes to approve it.
Mhm.
But I don't think it's pragmatic for us to sit here tonight and be like, hey, we have a brand new building inspector who started this week. Here's all of his core competencies and here's exactly how he's gonna review everything down the road, cause he is gonna need some help. And some help getting caught up on the plans, cause he would have been involved in this much earlier on in a normal situation. And I know that that's not something that you necessarily love, but I don't think we're being unreasonable here. And if we could find a not to exceed number that you can live with, we can all move on, because I don't think there's really anything else in this list of stuff that's gonna have this kind of discussion.
You had skipped over, one other provision, and it's all part of the same discussion.
Which one?
Is it 8? Is this what we're, is this?
No, we're at 8 now.
Okay,
Yeah.
Is this it?
Yeah, we're at 8.
Alright, fine, so, are you asking me to propose a number, are you gonna propose a number?
So,
We have a number on the table, right?
so the number that Bill, and I don't know if Bill saw and my apologies, because there were a lot of documents that were passed at the last minute today, between council, myself, and places. So I don't know if Mr. Murray actually saw this version as it's written, where we did take some of that stuff and push it to the new building inspector. So, and I don't know if that's something that he can go through and look at now, or whether that's even fair for us to ask. But what I see, the number that Mr. Murray gave us here is that is the not to exceed number. Mr. Murray has historically, I'll come back to you in a second, Mr. Murray has historically come back well within his proposals. We can't guarantee and or promise that, but that has been the history. Mr. Murray?
The numbers I gave you don't include the routine administrative add-on fee. So that, my numbers add up to $3,800, but if you add your administrative fee, it's $4,370.
Which we,
Yeah.
We agreed to waive that if we can get to a compromise here.
yeah,
Okay.
So it would be the services as listed on this estimate.
Mhm.
That would be the services.
But I would caution you that, if I go out there and somebody's working at 6 AM and I show up because I go to work early, that's a violation of special permit. We've already had that happen. And then it snowballs and I'm into 17 phone calls and another site visit. So this is what I call a defined scope.
correct.
So,
And in situations like that, would it not be fair to simply call the building inspector and say, there is something going on there, it's time for you to go out
Yeah.
there and assess what the situation is, why you
Yeah.
have somebody there at 6 AM?
yeah, please come and issue your $150 a day fine until they're back in compliance with their permit.
Sure. We haven't had that option till
I believe
up
our
till
new
now.
commissioner
No,
is
but exactly,
on
but we do have that option coming up now with the building inspector, so
Sure.
I think, and this is, I think, where it may make sense, Mr. Chair, for us to go through the items that we have in here and probably just work this out to what the roles and responsibilities are vis-a-vis places and associate versus building inspector, and see whether or not your numbers here concord with what changes we
And-
put into the special permit.
And that was my original intention
Yeah.
about how to try to eat the elephant here, is that we could go through that and find out.
So I think having the number as a bogey right now is probably not the best way for us to move forward. Rather, I think let's move through this here, understand what the roles and responsibilities are, and then work with Mr. Murray and see whether or not the scope of work that you envisioned and the numbers still jive, or whether or not they don't, and if they don't, where should they go? Okay? And then I think at the very end, I think as part of any good negotiation, that's when you get to the brass knuckles and start saying, that's the dollar amount.
That sound reasonable?
Okay? Let's do that.
So then to just, to sum up that there, so that's gonna hold 8 and it's gonna hold, 9, because 9 was originally the list of stuff, so we'll come back and look at that. So let's go to number 10.
Mr. Chairman, before
Yes.
we leave number 8, you've included town council fees.
So
I know that that's kind of gone in and gone out. If you're going to reach a not to exceed number, I'm certainly not prepared to even tell you what ours would be. I will tell you that sometimes our fees are paid for by an applicant, sometimes they are not. Sometimes the applicant will only pay for, the time that we actually spend like drafting, developing the decision. They don't necessarily pay for general advice that we give to the board. So I just raised that because I think that's something we have to circle back to as well.
Yeah, we can come back to, I think the challenge that comes up with that is we don't have hiring or supervising authority over town council. So that is all entirely a black box to me, and I don't know if I have the ability to, if the board even have the ability to waive anything that the town did there. And I don't know that we can, I don't think that there's much that we as a board can do on that, but we'll put a pin in that and come back, because I think the rest of this goes a lot quicker.
Thanks for alerting us that this is not
Yeah.
pro bono.
So number 10, the Hubbardston Police, Fire, and other public safety agencies shall be provided with the up-to-date contact names and numbers of operations, maintenance, contractors, of wireless carrier service in the event of a change. The building inspector shall be informed in writing within 90 days of such a change. I would like to add, with building inspector, planning board clerk. Just, because it's the same person, it's inspectional services, I don't think it creates a burden to anybody. Then 11, any changes to this project shall be reviewed by the planning board to determine if such changes are significant or of a minor nature. Significant changes shall require public notification and hearing at the applicant's cost to allow the board, abutters, and others the opportunity to review such changes at a public hearing. Should the board determine changes proposed or made are not significant, they shall be determined to be minor engineering changes and shall be noted as such on any as-built plan certification, with no further action required by the board.
Should we just make sure that we are okay on each one of these statements?
Yeah, if anybody wants me to hold, say hold.
Okay, thank you.
12, if anybody on the board, or the applicant, or Mr. Murray or town council wants me to hold, say hold. 12, on the 1-year anniversary of the issuance date of the building permit, double permit there, and each year thereafter annually, the permit holder shall provide the building inspector and planning board clerk, a written report of the status of the project, including site-related maintenance that has occurred, photographs of the site and access areas, and narrative of pending operational and maintenance activities planned for the coming year. A summary of all complaints received by the operator as to the function of the facility, a summary of the resolution to such complaints if so resolved. If not resolved, a status update on achieving resolution with the complaint. 13, and here's where there are some changes, where I think we might have some questions for town council. Decommissioning bond. Prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall provide the to the town of Hubbard, should provide the town of Hubbardston with a decommissioning bond in the amount of $40,000 guaranteed with sureties consistent with documents applicants submitted to the planning board as part of its special
Special permit.
Permit application and in form satisfactory to the building inspector. B, prior to or on the date of expiration of the provided decommissioning bond, the applicant shall provide to the building inspector proof of the bond and sureties renewal and updated expiration status. The amount of the bond shall be increased as appropriate to accommodate the increase of decommissioning over time. C, should the let me get C and we'll come back to it. Should the decommissioning bond be allowed to expire during the operation of the wireless facility, such expiration will be considered a violation of the conditions of this permit. And there's an extra paragraph, an extra period there. Alright, Mr. Murray?
That's such a vague phrase, I can't. Appropriate to accommodate the increase of decommissioning over time. Who reviews that? How is it established? So, very much like on the decommissioning of a solar field. When they originally submitted that decommissioning bond, they said the value to decommission was something like $40,000 because we're gonna sell all of our old solar panels and recycle them and everything else. And it's been standard practice not only in this town, but in other towns to not accept the recycling factor because you don't know what the future's gonna hold. This is an ambiguous, 2.5% has been shown to be the average inflation over the last 40 years. And that's not an arbitrary number that I pulled out of the sky, that comes from many different quantifiable sources. So, this year our inflation is 7.5%, but in future years it averages out to 2.5%. So, as appropriate to, is the building inspector gonna figure out the decommissioning every single year? Because this is a bond and bonds are issued for a single year. And in the past, you've required passbooks, cash security, which is placed on an interest-bearing account so that it automatically renews itself. And I see this happen in town after town after town that we work in. After 4 years, somebody forgets the bond gets forgotten, and nobody notices it until, oops, in 25, 30 years, there is no bond. And who made sure it was appropriate? So I don't believe that as appropriate, unless the applicant wants to fund a review by a responsible entity to protect the board that the amount is appropriate on a yearly basis.
Town council?
I had flagged that in my comments as well earlier today that, as appropriate, my questions were, who determines what is appropriate? And what is the process for that?
Do you have a recommendation on how to address that or how?
I suggested revert back to the 2.5% annually. I thought that at least we, that if part of the goal here is that, the planning board doesn't wanna have to be revisiting this on an annual basis, or even if you're asked to do this on an annual basis, you're gonna look to some sort of expert to say, well, what do we think the appropriate amount of the bond should be, in year 10? If you've got an automatic escalator in there, it's done for you.
I had a rent once, and there was a clause for escalation in there, and it said, based on the inflation rate as published by the New York Times on January 1st of every year.
Another mechanism is what you're suggesting, a potential.
I mean,
Yeah.
no
Either
offense
something
to,
fixed as this here or something that is variable based on something
right,
that
no
is
offense to the
known,
building
well
inspector, but
published.
that's a pretty easy
I
number to
understand.
figure
Yeah.
out.
I think we understand where you're going with this here. Any other comments? I mean,
Well, I do see that probably is a difficult thing to push onto the building inspector, and
Yep.
that it probably would be better to just peg it to a benchmark as opposed to something that has so much squish in it as appropriate.
I agree with all of that. The problem with a benchmark is there's 1,000 different benchmarks, so you can't just say the consumer price index, you have to say very specifically the consumer price index with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and there's a very broad language and then the building inspector, and then it's like finding that is equally challenging. The reason I said as appropriate, and I disagree with the first statement that inflation has averaged over 20.5%, it's actually been much less than that until this year. And so if we did 2.5% this year, last year, year before, the last 20 years, that would have been grossly in excess. And then this year, it's grossly inadequate. So, so we can either agree on a benchmark, but you've got to be very specific. Or the reason I said as appropriate, because we had submitted a letter from the engineer based on engineering standards that said, this is the cost of removal. And maybe we resubmit that letter every year with the increased bond, because the letter that we gave is very detailed and has inflationary factors built into it.
So, I'm reluctant to offload the preparation of the letter just because of the difficulty we've had just chasing solar fields for their operational reports.
But we have to produce the bond, so in connection with the bond, we would have to produce an updated letter that says this is the cost of decommissioning. And so it goes up and down, and it's the same letter that we've already produced, that you seem satisfied with. We just gotta provide an update every year. I just don't wanna say, inflation has not been, it's been barely 1% for the last 10 years. And now this year, you're right, it's significantly higher.
What was the benchmark that was suggested? Francois, was it you that suggested?
No, it was Bill.
Yeah.
What was the one that you suggested?
It came from my lease at one of my properties once. It was the inflation rate as published in the New York Times on January 1st of each year. And I don't agree, because we did a calculation for inflation rate over the solar farms, all of the solar farms, and the published rate is 2.4, 2.3, 2.7 over the last 25 years. So I strongly don't agree with that statement, because we just did a solar farm, 3 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Could I have one part of this conversation? This is Tom John.
Sure.
On that removal bond estimate that, Vertex provided, it's broken out into a number of tasks. Probably 20 different, construction line items. And that comes from this, RS Means, which is an estimating book. And that's what really also, has some factors that are put in at the end of that. But the reason I bring that up is, there are certain items, and we've seen it particularly over the last year, certain items, the cost has gone up significantly. For example, the cost of the trucking, the diesel, or the cost of PVC pipe, they're strange things. So each one of these line items may fluctuate more or less than that overall average. So what Attorney Parisi has kind of indicated here is that it's maybe not a bad idea to take, with the updated bond, to take an updated removal estimate as part of that looks at not just the overall economies up and down, but the up and down of each one of those line items required actually take time.
Alice?
What are you presently doing with renewing your bonds? You've got other towers that have been up a year, right, that have gone through the renewal process?
Some towns it's a year, some towns it's 5 years, because they don't wanna have to task the building inspector with this as well.
Okay.
It's just 2.5% a year is 12.5% over 5 years, and that's.
But so as it is now, with all these other projects, you go out and you pay somebody to do an estimate of the removal cost based on the cost of metal and recycling wire and the thing that you.
And that's more accurate.
And that's what you do now?
Yeah.
And you've got somebody that does this? I mean, to me, it doesn't, if you said a 5-year bond, it would be helpful, rather than having to deal with it every year. And it seems to me that it's not particularly, I mean, he wants to take, seems to me it'd be easier to add the 2% than it would be to go back to an engineer to recalculate this. But if that's what he's agreeing to do, what harm is it?
Mr. Murray?
The only comment I have on that is, traditionally, the planning board doesn't accept something from an engineer until it's been peer reviewed. How many bonds have been submitted as part of the solar farm that we have said, you can't accept this number for this reason or that reason? So if they're gonna produce a bond produced by an engineer, you're gonna want somebody to review it and not blindly accept it and take it as is. So it gets burdensome. Is it more accurate? Sure, absolutely, it potentially is, assuming that all the variety of instances are taken into consideration.
Is there some way you could say, this is what he gave us last time, maybe you've seen this? A letter from and state the qualification of the people that have to provide it?
Well, there are engineers providing it using RS means, and RS means is, it's a clearinghouse of costs that's accepted, and they adjust them for region.
Well, could we put that in?
The problem is it still is something developed by somebody making judgment calls, which should be reviewed.
But isn't this RS means, that's what it is it's a clearinghouse?
Well, it is, assuming that they choose the right category and that, it's a cookbook, and as long as you get all the ingredients, then yes, but somebody who knows how to cook needs to read the ingredients list, to use a very bad analogy.
There's one item that already brought up a couple of times, and that's the value of recycled material. As you can imagine, there's a lot of steel for the tower, and that has decent value. If and when the tower ever came down, there could be some scrap value to that. That's not something that we specifically exclude that from our estimate. But there's an additional, could be an additional decent sized credit in there that's not already worked into, so there already is some flux in that number, as far as the overall value of what would be removed from the site if given the back.
Okay. So I'm gonna go to Mr. Murray next, but I've heard a lot of arguments here. I'd like to hear some suggested solutions instead.
Just one final, let's put it in perspective. This is a bond. It costs something on the 1.5% of the value of the whatever it is that you're bonding. We're actually talking hundreds of dollars, maybe $1,000 a year in cost for this bond. I mean,
It's
that's the
not 45,
perspective
yeah.
that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, anything else from the board, potential solutions, recommendations from the board?
I mean, maybe they revisit the bond amount every 5 years. But that puts the town at risk if they get a lightning strike and it destroys the facility and they decide not to continue, and that happened in year 2 of the recycle site.
Right.
But
So these
I don't think it's an unreasonable
so these
re-estimate
bonds, these
every
bonds are
5
typically
years.
only 1 year though.
Bonding companies issue a bond for a single year,
Only for a single year, there's nothing more than that.
right?
Right, so in that case, I think we need to just make sure that we protect it.
Yeah,
And there's no question about this here.
it sounds like we're building in a ton of complexity to
That's
something
correct.
that could just be 2.5% and doesn't
Yes.
rise to a ton of costs over a long period of time when you start talking about.
You take the last 40 years, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the inflation rate, yes, there's been some negative, there's been some positives, and there's some big positives and some negatives. It comes out to 2.86, I just did the calculation, and that's based on CPI over the last 40 years. If this tower is supposed to last for 40 years, I think a 2.5 is a reasonable number at this point in time.
Just do it.
Let's continue.
I think we should put in the 5 years in this,
We just did the 2.5% and that makes the rest
2.5%.
of it.
for 5 years.
Yes.
For each per year.
Per year.
Per year.
But the bond he gives is good for 5 years.
The
No.
bonds are only renewable.
They're only
for 1 year.
renewable every
Bonding
year.
companies issued a bond for 1
Annually.
year,
Yeah.
that's it.
That's it.
And that's the big problem.
I
Cause
thought
if
he
it does-
just said 5 years, or somebody said
If
5 years.
he's talking about revisiting,
Yeah, if we're doing
Oh,
revalue.
okay, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, my mistake, no problem.
but now we're not gonna revisit, we're just gonna
Yeah.
every year increase the bond amount.
so, 14, if delivery of tower components or other structures require transport on oversized vehicles, Vertex will notify the Hubbardston Chief of Police at least 48 hours in advance and comply with requirements of the chief for delivery, including payment of police detail if so required.
Well, what happened to the planning board reserves the right and violation of permits?
So we had pulled those off of this version. The applicant had flagged those as sections that he objected to, and we conferred with town council. And town council did agree with the observation that they were either covered by state law or exceeding our authority.
Okay.
So we removed them. So that moves us to 15. The applicant shall provide the fire and police chiefs with access keys codes to get into
The unlock. Or get,
How
to
about-
unlock the gate,
yeah,
unlock the gate.
to unlock the gate at the cell tower facility in case of emergency. 16, the applicant shall install appropriate signage on the fence surrounding the cell tower facility, including owner name, emergency contact information, and a warning of any danger. 17, the applicant shall install signage at the base of the driveway or other appropriate location stating that the driveway is for private access only and closed to the public. 18, during construction. Construction hours shall be limited to weekdays, 8 AM to 5 PM. Contractor shall supply sanitary facilities appropriate for the number of workers on site. Signage with emergency contact information, both during construction and when operational, shall be posted at the access gate. The building inspector shall confirm that all signs meet the requirements of the town of Hubbardston signage bylaws.
Someone put a hold on number 8, on A, when we get back,
Yeah.
please.
During construction, the building inspector shall have the right to enter the subject property to conduct inspections. Inspections shall not be limited to one topic, but shall be to determine compliance with the issued permit and related conditions. The inspecting official shall notify the contractor of the inspection and shall be subject to applicable safety standards.
So hold on that one.
Yep. Construction shall be done in phases so that the entire site is not exposed, erodible soil at the same time. All stumps/wood waste not stockpiled on the site for later use shall be disposed of in accordance with the Massachusetts wood waste policy. No stump shall be buried on site. No debris, junk, rubbish, or other non-biodegradable waste materials shall be buried or burned on
Any portion.
on any portion of the land within the limits of work, and removal of the same shall be required prior to system operation. Any fill materials imported to the site shall be clean and shall not contain any hazardous materials or building demolition debris. All erosion control measures, including temporary settling basins, shall be maintained until the site is fully stabilized. The contractor is responsible for keeping sediment from the site from collecting into the abutting roadway. And we did have a suggestion from town council on this that didn't get in, where we propose sweeping.
Say again?
Sweeping, which seems obvious. If there is debris, you need to sweep it. What was the specific wording there?
I think I put in consider daily sweeping / watering of Brigham Street or the environment, the surrounding street. If there,
It would just be Brigham Road, yes.
Brigham only, okay.
Yeah, Brigham Street, Brigham Road.
The other issue there, if there is sediment on Brigham Street, they've already violated their NPDS and the requirements of this permit.
Do you wanna address this as a whole?
Yeah, let's mark this as a whole and come back to it then. The contractor, is responsible.
You said that one, K.
Yeah, sorry. I put the mark on the wrong one. If blasting is determined to be necessary, no perchlorates shall be used during blasting operations. pre-blast surveys and blasting permits shall be obtained from the authority having jurisdiction. TB blasting, if it is required, shall be considered a change to the project as described in condition number
11.
11.
Alright, and then
Which will change.
Right.
That will not be 11 anymore.
Yeah.
we'll be back to 10, won't we?
Fix number. And then,
Tom, can I ask a question? What that says is that if we blast, we need to come back to the planning board, which would, I believe, require a public hearing. Is that gonna be any issue? Do you foresee that?
At this point, we don't anticipate having the blast. We won't know for sure until we do the geotech boring there. It's something that we do and have done a number of tower sites. And there is usually a process with the local fire department and pre-blast surveys and a blast permit. So there's already normally a process in place, but if this process includes coming back to the planning board, the only thing it does is effectively strings out the construction time frame, but a lot of times what we like to do is if we do encounter ledge, we do attempt to hammer it, depending on how much ledge there is to remove. And that's our first choice, and a lot of times we'll attempt that and determine if the rock is able to be removed by mechanical means, and then the blasting becomes the last choice. But we don't know till we get in and actually hammer it. So if at that point we needed to pause to come back and notice a public meeting and come back to the planning board, it's just gonna add a timeframe in the middle of construction.
It would, once you do a geotech, if blasting is a possibility, would we have time to go back prior to the issuance of a building permit?
Sure, but like I said, even if rock is present on the geotech, that's not a go or no go on the blast. A lot of times it's we'll try mechanically to remove it.
So is there a reason why we have to come back to the planning board if there's a process to blast? If there's a pre-blast survey and blasting permit, and we'd have to go to the fire chief and all that? There's a standard process for that.
It's usually handled by certified blasters, and it's not a giant explosion, and they cover it, they mat it, so it's usually a going flood, and they pull the mats off and put the rock in. So it's not and it would be, typically the only place we would need to do it would be at the tower foundation to finish.
well, but, town council and Mr. Murray.
They are correct that if they do wind up blasting, they have to go to the local fire chief and get a permit to do that. And yes, they do have to do pre-blast surveys. I guess the question just becomes, for the planning board, if blasting is required at this site, and you're going to consider that to be, a major modification for public hearing purposes, how would that change the permit? I could certainly see that maybe there are some safety mechanisms you might wanna add as far as, debris or fly rock, things of that nature.
Won't that be ultimately addressed by the fire chief and, the department itself?
He could, yes.
So the short answer is, so this has happened in towns that we've worked in before. And blasting doesn't affect just the area that is being blasted, and in this case, they'd have to use a very, very small amount of blasting. but blasting affects people's wells. Blasting potentially affects people's foundations. And I think that the overwhelming reason for the planning board to open that up is to identify those things. You'd want the fire chief to be present at that meeting, but most importantly, you would want the abutters to be notified that this is gonna happen.
So,
Cause the fire chief looks at health, safety and welfare, the aesthetics, the, you know, he's not worried about wells per se, cause that's not his purview. His purview is things flying through the air or a seismic wave that knocks a house off its foundations, those kind of things. But the planning board has a whole lot bigger
so
items.
I guess the question I have here is, well, what does our bylaws say about this, and isn't there a strict liability standard to damage that's caused during blasting anyways?
Yes, but it's also extremely hard to prove, like on a well.
Could the board maybe consider adding a couple of, if we were to come back and say we need to blast, you would say, okay, make sure the butters are notified, make sure the pre-blast survey is done, and make sure that blast area is matted and that work is done by a certified blast. Could those conditions be worked into this approval now to alleviate what would be concerns, so that it takes out that timeframe in the construction part?
Yeah,
So you're saying, is there a way to make it be a minor change rather than a major change as part of it?
well,
You could. It's
what would-
it's a pretty small area that they're gonna blast, so,
And
you know,
we decide
if-
what's major and minor.
well, if they, and I'm not proposing to say this is how they're gonna do it, but if it was my client, I'd be telling them, you're gonna do 4 small, tiny little blasts to get it out of there instead of, you're not gonna take it out in one big boom. And 4 tiny little blasts are a whole lot safer, reduce the impact by a magnitude.
Yeah.
And that, but my big concern is, I mean, we talked about water for irrigation affecting somebody at length, and blasting has the ability to affect private wells. There's no way to predict it.
so what would you suggest as language there? 'Cause I also think it's important to note that we're talking about something here that's really pretty directed, talking about cracking ledge that's in holes for footing, not general quarrying. And that it is a different animal, but there are certainly things that we need to protect for, so what
So I
would you
guess
suggest for language?
my only question is, so an abutter is notified, does that give them the right to say anything to anybody about it?
So,
And open up a new appeal period, you know, that's the whole point, that, there's a process, the building inspector deals with not the building inspector, the fire chief deals with blasting all the time. I don't think you have a bylaw that says no blasting in the town of Hubbardston. If you blast, you have to comply with the, pre-blast surveys and blasting permits, it's, and
so just to talk through how it would work as it is currently written, so if it did trigger as a engineering change, when it triggered an engineering change, it would trigger a request to the board, and then the board would determine whether or not it was a minor or major change, and then depending upon that, it would be the process that was outlined there. So if it was a minor change, like we had early in this meeting, there was an engineering letter, we approved, we all moved on with our lives. If it's a major change, and as it's outlined in this document, then it goes through the process where abutters are noticed, and where'd it go? It was in the section of stuff we did.
But it would be no change, cause we haven't provided that detail yet. We haven't done any geotechnical analysis
Yeah.
yet, so we haven't designed the foundation yet, so
Which is
there would
what-
be no change.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why the condition's there. But Mr. Chairman, that makes great sense, because they could come in front of you and say, we are gonna do 16 tiny little blasts, and this is the effect in seismography and those kind of things, and they can present you a well document, well thought out pre-blast survey, they can show you what they've done, those kind of things, and that makes great sense, and then the board would then have the ability to determine whether it's major or minor.
What if we assume that blasting needed to be done and address that right now? So go under the assumption that we do need to blast there. As part of that, we're over 1,000 feet from, any residential structures. And we're limiting it to, a foundation that's, less than 30 foot square and less than 7 feet deep. So it's a minor area with a large distance between. Generally, where we've run into problems, we've done it with demolition projects where you're close, or you're close to a historic foundation. With such a large distance, I'm not saying it's not possible, but I think the potential for issues is greatly diminished by the how far we are set back and anything we could have potential.
Yeah, but what's not taken into consideration is the impact that it has on any kind of aquifer, and the impact that that aquifer has on the wells that are for the properties that are downhill, specifically Brigham Street and so forth.
But you're not
So-
gonna, you're
So
not
just-
gonna
just a
know
little
that
bit more
until
on
we
that
blast.
process.
I'm not disagreeing, but there has to be an evaluation of this here. And I don't think that you are in any position at this point in time to evaluate that yourselves, because you really have no knowledge in terms of what you are going to be confronted until you come back with a geotech. Is that correct?
Where-
So as a result of that, I think the board at this point in time should really leave that open, that it does come back to the board for us to reconsider based on what your assessment is. And instead of us grasping on things that we don't know and predict the future, which we have no idea as to what's gonna happen until such time. And I think we need to leave the door open for ourselves to be able to evaluate that based on what you can come back with.
So, what I, and this is speaking for myself, not speaking for the board. The way I look at this is if there were clear, concise criteria that Bill could suggest that we all agreed with, I would be happy putting that in there. If that's something that's pragmatic to come back to. If not,
No.
defining it as an engineering change.
Yeah.
So he's saying no, so it's gotta be done on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and the reason is the pre-blast survey tells you what the likelihood of, you have historic houses right in the center of town, yeah, they're far, far away. We don't know if any of those houses are, stone block foundations setting on ledge. If they're setting on ledge and you're blasting, you're gonna have some seismic effect. What happens to the old church? So the pre-blast survey is such you need so much more information before you can establish a set of parameters. Now, maybe the applicant knows better than I. Maybe they can propose a set of standards that could be reviewed, but I honestly think the cleanest and easiest way is the mechanism that you've already got, because I'm quite confident that if they need to blast and they tell their blaster, we gotta do this in a very small controlled way, it's gonna be pragmatically easy for the board to say, oh,
Yes or
okay,
no.
that's not a big deal. You've done your pre-blast survey, you're gonna do little pops, off you go.
Yeah.
So let's leave it the way it's written.
Yeah,
Just one last question there, what would be the typical timeframe for a return to the board, a re-notification, a presentation of that material, a butters comments? Just in terms of something we should be planning for on the construction side, if we need to take a break, in the middle of construction for that length of time, what is that general time?
So we just did a minor change for a special permit holder in the span of about 2 weeks. He actually asked for 2. He had to resubmit for the second one today, but the first one he had sent it in, and in 2 weeks we had done it as a minor change. Now, obviously our process says the board would need to rule whether or not it was a minor change or a major engineering change. Then that would determine how it would be tracked, but those do tend to be handled fairly quickly. And I would rather not belabor something when we do have that process for minor and major changes, when
Yep.
it's something that only is this could potentially happen down the road someday, when we have literally a, 3/4 of a page left. So, to go through and review here.
Just one more thought there, what was the major change? We were talking about whether to classify it as a major, and what would be a major change?
So the way the special permit is written, and I have not done a major engineering change since I've been on the board. We've handled most of what's come in front of us as minor changes. So I can't comment to as what the timeline would be if it was a major change. I can only specifically address what it's been as a minor. But it is the process that is outlined in the special permit, and it is the process that we have done in every special permit that we've issued in the years that I've been on the board. So I'm inclined to keep it that way, especially since if it was a major change, it gives the public an opportunity to speak, and I am generally pro-public opportunity to speak in a controlled format. So I would suggest that we as a board, we leave it, just called shall be considered an engineering change to the project as described, and then reference the section that's already in there.
Yep.
And we move on. So, there's still those couple holds there, but let's do the last one here, which is I. The petitioner and any subsequent owner or operator shall maintain the facility in good condition. Maintenance shall include, but not be limited to, painting, fencing, structural repairs, monitoring and maintenance of the security system and storm water management system. Site access shall be maintained to a level acceptable to the fire chief, police chief, director of emergency medical services. The owner or operator shall be responsible for the cost of maintaining the telecommunications installation and any access roads connected to public ways. That is the end of 18, with the exception of those couple holds. So let's go back up to those holds.
The first hold is the one I think
What happened to 19?
We're gonna come back to 19, we're just gonna address 18.
Okay.
first of all I have here, which is mine, which is construction hours shall be limited to weekdays from 8 to 5. I just wanna indicate it's non-holidays.
That seems reasonable. State holidays, federal holidays,
Not to include holidays.
yeah,
Not to include holidays.
But you gotta be specific.
Yeah,
federal
Yeah.
there's a
Right,
lot
so why do we
of
do
Grandparents' Day.
Right,
not to
yeah.
include federal holidays.
Federal holidays, how about that, okay?
So Bunker Hill Day won't work.
Unless you're in Charleston.
Alright, and then we had a hold
D.
on D.
So you took out during construction, town officials or their designated agent, and you only left in the building inspector.
So,
But we just discussed that you would,
yeah, going back with what we talked about before, I think town officials or the building inspector. I don't think we should specifically exclude town officials. That's not saying that they have to go there, it's just not specifically excluding them.
It needs to, the Board of Selectmen don't need to show up, I don't know, but, town officials is very broad. The building inspector is the one that does site inspections, and the building inspector is one that is, on-site, on construction, and knows the OSHA requirements for showing up at a construction site. And so that's all I was trying to limit it to,
Mhm.
is someone who is a professional that
Right.
is used to doing that.
But we need
and
to be
not-
able to have
and not,
both.
not anybody, including the planning board, who aren't familiar with the OSHA requirements, or any other board that does not have jurisdiction over the facility.
So the only concern is also being able to have places
Yeah,
perform any of their duties. Why don't we just add places and the building inspector shall have the right to enter?
I would object to places, I would put, or its representative.
planning board representative, agent.
Fine.
okay. So then there was.
Planning board agent and building inspector.
that clears the holds that were in 19. So 19. Prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy or building permit sign-off by the building inspector, the petitioner shall provide on-site training for Hubbardston Police, Fire, and Fire Department and EMS first responders. The building inspector shall be notified of the timing of this training and reserves the right to attend it.
Well,
An operations and maintenance plan of the installation, including measures for maintaining safe access to the installation, stormwater controls, maintenance of the stormwater BMPs, as well as general procedure for operational maintenance of the installation shall be submitted to the building inspector.
well,
I would like to add planning board clerk to that.
Yep.
Also, the planning board clerk is the same person for the building inspector. 'Cause that is our land use agent. A as-built plan shall be prepared by a Massachusetts licensed professional engineer submitted to the building commissioner,
No, inspector.
inspector, and clerk, planning board clerk.
In that case, we generally use a licensed professional land survey.
Licensed professional.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we get surveyed, as-built, so I just put it, not a surveyor, but an engineer.
Okay, so,
it's usually a surveyor.
so it is, should be a survey.
We typically use a surveyor to do that.
Okay. Such plans shall depict the location of all control and electrical boxes, concrete pad, stone pad, fences, all structures, poles, overhead and buried wires, and conduit, and shall certify that the zoning requirements are met prior to the application for transmission, or it would be application for.
Are met period, cause we have a date by
Yeah.
which we have to provide it.
And ultimately, it's gonna be a certificate of occupancy, even though it's not really occupied.
Some towns don't give a certificate of occupancy and they just have the building permit, building inspector sign off on the building permit because there's no occupiable structure, so it's just semantics.
It shall include a certification by a professional engineer that the drainage system was built in accordance with the approved plan, and if not, supporting documentation that the site still complies with the DEP storm water manual criteria. Applicant must give the town a signed letter agreeing to notify the town 90 days prior to discontinuance. The applicant must remove the facility within 90 days of giving said notice. If the applicant does not notify the town of the discontinuance but ceases using the facility after 90 days, and that should be capitalized, of non-use, the planning board, after a hearing with prior notice to the applicant, may declare the facility to be abandoned. If the applicant fails to remove the facility within 90 days of discontinuance or abandonment, then the town may remove the facility at the cost of the applicant or owner. Any bonds or other surety would be forfeited to the benefit of the town for the cost of any such decommissioning or removal. And that is the end of the terms. So
We had a couple
there's a
of
hold
holds.
on 19 for.
A.
and B.
Okay. Mr. Murray?
Traditionally, members of the planning board and my office have attended the training sessions as information only. And to restrict it to the building inspector shall be notified, the building inspector and the planning agent is fine by planning board clerk, is fine by me, but I believe you should have the right to send a representative.
Yeah, would like to add planning board clerk there, and,
Planning board clerk?
well,
Plan-
the planning board clerk shall be noticed, and then I imagine if one of us was like, hey, Mr. Parisi, I'd like to, attend that myself, you're not gonna object to that, are you?
No.
Okay.
I'm gonna tell you what, the same objection that we've had all the time. You don't need, Placement Associates to show up at all these meetings and to do things that the building inspector is tasked to do. If
I'm
the
not in
planning
there.
board wants to
Mhm.
show up to those type of things, absolutely, but, I've never had it happen before. The planning board is usually done after tonight,
Yeah.
and then it's delegated to, responsible professionals in the town.
So we're still gonna be coming back to number 8, so I think
understand.
that conversation part comes there. I don't think, the building inspector and planning board clerk is unreasonable to put in there. And then the planning board clerk can give notice to whoever.
The building inspector can also provide that notice if they want, but that's fine, we'll provide the same notice.
It's functionally the same person, you'd end up emailing it, so.
Understand.
But, who knows what happens with the structure of the department in the future, so. And then we had made the same change at B, and I have a tick mark on C. What are we holding on that one too?
Is
No,
that
we
just
had
because of the surveyor?
discussion, yeah.
But, so what has been removed from this is any of your final powers that you reserved on your solar fields, the certificate to generate, because and yes, we have a new new building inspector, but we don't know to what extent he's gonna enforce those things. And the very next amp powered right up, building inspector, electrical inspector signed off, and the site wasn't done. They had a massive drainage blowout that affected endangered species, all those kind of things. So you've abdicated to the building inspector. Once it's structurally complete and it's enclosed, technically he's supposed to also go through this special permit and make sure the requirements of that are met before a permit is issued. So you're out of that loop now. There is no say. They will be able to start generating and everything else with any final review by the planning board, not part of this process, unless the building inspector, the new guy, and we don't know, makes it part of his process.
Well, I don't think we have the same bylaw footing that we do as we do for the solar installations, because we do have the certificate to
So
generate.
this is kind of a point that I wanted to bring up to the point. This is a special permit, and under the zoning act, a special permit is acknowledged to have unique requirements that allow the planning board to put special conditions on the permit because it is unique. And the applicant keeps insisting that how every other town does it, it does not bind you. Yes, if it were a subdivision, it's cookbook, you will do it according to subdivision regulations, and your discretion is limited. Under a special permit, your discretion is limited by reason and common sense and the general guidelines of the zoning bylaw, and of course, town council can address this probably more accurately than I can. You have a lot more discretion because it's unique to the town of Hubbardston.
Town council, I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Well, I'm not sure what concerns Mr. Murray has that relative to paragraphs 8 or 19, because looking at this, I don't see anything, if we look at paragraphs, A, B, and C from the prior draft, we haven't really changed much other than specifying that prior to system operation or prior to energizing the
Right.
system, certain things shall be submitted. The decommissioning language, yes, that's been different, but again, that's what the wireless communications overlay district bylaw provides, so I think D should stay as is.
Yeah, the issue is with the solar farms, they energized
Mhm.
before the project was completed.
Yep.
Once they energize, there is no motivation on their part other than extraordinary measures by the town to get them to finish compliance. So the standard, the last 2 or 3 have been required to fully comply before they can fully energize and become a viable commercial venture, and that is the concern. Once they get up and running, if the building inspector signs off and doesn't look at the special permit, it takes leaps and bounds on behalf of the town to get them to comply. But if they fully comply when they're ready to energize, then everybody's happy and there's no issue, and the planning board is
Well, let's take
assured
the
that
example
there's
of what we
special.
have here very specifically, which is a tower that will be potentially transmitting and or receiving
Making
signals.
money.
Well, forget about making money, it's just,
True.
let's talk about the physics here. It's actually the transmission or the receiving of radio signals, right? So, what you're indicating here is that the building inspector could theoretically sign off prior to, I'm sorry, prior to the transmission or the receiving of radio frequency signals into that tower, correct?
Commercial operation, so no different, it's happened on every single one of the solar fields.
I'm just trying to understand what the
The building
concept.
inspector has said, from the building permit application, the electrical inspector all the way through the list.
Correct.
It's all met, I signed off, here's your permit, and yet the planning board's permit requirements were not met. So the building inspector did not look at that, he looked at the building code, he looked at the electrical code on that, and they started generating energy, which is why you had a certificate to generate, because
Correct, but we don't have something similar to that here, so my question here
I think
is,
it's completely analogous.
I'm sorry, no, I'm saying we do not have a certificate to generate, we have a certificate which is basically the one that is provided by the building inspector to basically go ahead and do and complete the construction, right?
Right.
What I'm trying to understand here is what criteria are we putting in other than the building and that they're meeting the building requirements before they can go ahead and transmit or receive radio frequency signals?
If I could answer that, sir?
No, I'm asking the gentleman here.
So-
I wanna understand
Sure.
from your perspective, what is it that we would want to be able to limit?
So
I'm trying to understand that.
traditionally, the erosion controls have been a very big deal. The fact that
Mhm.
the facility is up and running and operating, and we still don't have lawns and disturbed surfaces stabilized by plantings or other means. So there are a lot of these end of the project
Okay. But
aspects.
are those not things that we expect the building inspector to have reviewed as the person who's looking at this here?
I can't speak for the new building inspector, but I don't know if he's a site specialist or not.
Regardless of, I mean, the question I'm asking is that's what we are imposing on the building inspector through this special permit
Well,
or not?
it's compliance to all of your criteria.
Could I interrupt?
Yes.
Because I think if we go back to the prior draft, and I don't know if folks have a prior draft handy, it was paragraph 15 that was struck there, which said that, and we could wordsmith this a little bit, but the prior paragraph 15 said, no wireless cellular facility may sell or distribute wireless provider services until all pre-construction and construction required conditions of the issued permit and the requirements of this bylaw are approved and certified at a meeting of the planning board, and the completion certificate is issued and recorded at the Worcester County Register of Deeds with proof of recording provided to the building commissioner.
Okay.
I think if we take this paragraph 15, move it here under 19, because 19 is addressing prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, if that's what our building inspector will issue, or the building permit sign off. If we move paragraph 15 here, I think that addresses your concerns.
And becomes a directive for the building inspector to validate and verify that he has completed this?
It does, and like I said, we
On our
can,
behalf?
and like I said, we can wordsmith this a little bit, because then going back to earlier concerns that, you know, the planning board would like to be out of this business after
Right.
tonight.
Oh.
So the question becomes, you know, does this need to be, done and certified at a meeting of the planning board? You know, if the building inspector is reviewing for purposes of either the building code or compliance with zoning, and you've also got Places engineer who's doing the project closeout, and as Mr. Murray described earlier, he's gonna go through the special permit with a fine-tooth comb to make sure everything is complied with, and you're gonna get that confirmation from him. It would seem to me that is the point at which this can become, it can be commercially operational.
I'm looking at the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw is very clear, and I would ask that you simply regurgitate the zoning bylaw. The building inspector will not grant an occupancy permit until he and the planning board receive a construction control certification that is stamped by a professional engineer licensed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This certifies that the communication facility was built in accordance with the planning board approved construction plans and specifications as contained in the application and the special permit, conditions if any granted by the planning board. There's already a process in your zoning bylaw to do this. And, there's no such thing as, what was the language in 15, a certification, but there is a process called a construction control certification under Massachusetts law that the building inspector is charged with complying with. So your zoning bylaw is perfectly adequate, and we don't need to invent more processes and more fees and more planning board approvals, because the bylaw says, give us the affidavit required under Massachusetts law. And that's the sign off. Cause there's gotta be some certainty to the process. And I agree with you, we need to comply with the special permit criteria. And that's what we get our engineer to certify and provide an affidavit to the building inspector. And if the building inspector can look at it too. We don't need outside consultants, we don't need the planning board, we don't need a public hearing, we don't need, new appeal periods, we just need the building inspector to do their job. In compliance with the zoning bylaw.
Hold on a second, Francois.
Yeah.
Town council?
I do agree. I think looking at the wireless overlay bylaw and its 18.6.2 C1, as Mr. Parisi just read to you, it does require the building inspector
Okay.
that there's no occupancy permit until they get that construction certification and a stamped engineer, and they also certify that the facility is built in accordance with the planning board's approved construction plans and specifications and the special permit conditions, if any. I think that does give you the coverage.
And we also have, I think, number 2, which says after construction is completed, the town building inspector and the planning board will inspect the site to verify that all requirements of the article were met. So we do have that included in under C2. Goes even further, it says an occupancy permit will be issued if and when both the building inspector and the planning board agree that all requirements of the article have been met.
Yep.
Now, if I may, just one particular glitch there is, we don't know whether the building inspector is going to issue a certificate of occupancy or he's gonna do the building permit sign off.
So I agree with that. And the only other issue is, how does the planning board agree? Do we have to come to a meeting? What is your criteria for agreeing? Is there a public hearing? That's the whole point. We're trying to get the planning board out of the loop here and just defer on the professionals.
Well, we gotta live with the bylaws that we have.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna rewrite those bylaws tonight. So what's sounding like we're talking about here, and historically how that's happened is people have filed whatever documents and they've just been presented here and we've all moved on. It hasn't so much.
Then I would just say
Uniform?
regurgitate the
The
bylaw.
bylaw, yeah, I would suggest no occupancy permit, / building permit sign off. Shall issue as described in 18.6.2C1 until all requirements as outlined in the article are met.
It's actually C1, C2, and C3.
Correct.
Cause there's 3 steps.
I think they all said the same thing. Yes, there's 3 steps.
And that way we're saying look at the bylaw, and that's that. That makes sense, okay. So, that takes us back to the holds on 8 and 9.
Page 11. Okay.
Yeah, so 9, 9, I think we actually just addressed in that addition to 19. Because excuse me, just going with the process that's outlined in the bylaws.
Correct. I agree with that. So we can strike it out?
Makes sense to me unless anyone objects.
Nope.
So then 8. Final controversy.
So, these are still the items?
So I guess we need to, I guess we need to talk about that. So some of this stuff, like we said, is gonna require some support for us. We don't know where where Places Associates ended up on the not to exceed number with the drainage calculations. The assertion is that they are substantially below it, but I don't know.
Can we quantify that? He said he
Do
was
you-
done with the exception of a
Letter.
letter tomorrow,
Yeah.
an email tomorrow.
Do you have an idea of where you're gonna land? I don't know if you've reviewed the timesheets.
I didn't pull
Would you
it
feel
up
like
for
you're
the
gonna be
meeting.
substantially below? So let's hold that thought for the moment, cause that's a data point. The other data point is that, we have these numbers here that were, put out by Places Associates as a not to exceed for the finishing work. Then honestly, I don't know how I don't think we as a planning board can handle the issue about town council. I don't know, I'm gonna ask town council that, because we don't actually have authority over hiring you and supervising you, although we very much appreciate your efforts and we're excited to have you here tonight. So I ultimately don't know what the town administrator does on that or what authority we have to say. So I would be willing to say where we're not holding, we wouldn't hold that as one of our conditions, but I don't know that releases the town from any rights that it has, because I don't think we can. Help me out here.
I was gonna say, it varies widely, to be honest with you. I can tell you, for example, when Hubbardston's negotiated with, any of the marijuana establishments, that one of the things that typically gets built in is that the applicant is going to pay for, our legal fees in terms of the negotiation of the host community agreement. But it's something that, the town asks for and the applicant has to agree to. There's nothing, unlike Places Associate, who is your consultant and whose fees you are allowed to charge, it doesn't have a blanket extension to legal counsel.
So I look at it, and my feelings are on it this way. Obviously, to the extent that there were any town council fees because you were asserting a right and we had to receive counsel, those aren't appropriate. But there might be an hour or two, or a few hours, where because we didn't have Places Associates available to work because the fee was objected to, where we ended up hacking our way through this permit ourselves and then having town council fix that for us. And that is absolutely furthering the creation of the special permit and actively contributing to it, which is very different from just the nebulous, tell us about the TCA kind of issues. And I don't have visibility into what is what, because I am not managing town council or the town's defense. I don't even know what claims are currently asserted by who to whom, when and where, because it's not part of our review here. So
I'm going to propose something, assuming this is gonna get voted on tonight. I had wanted an itemized list of everything that we're going to be required to pay. And we're not gonna get that from town council tonight, but we can give them a date by which they submit that to us. And the date has to be very quickly, because if I don't agree with that number, my only recourse is to appeal the decision. So, and what we're gonna be looking at is, those things that you just mentioned, You know, I don't know whether the zoning board asked town council for any advice, but that's irrelevant to the planning board.
Doesn't appeal to us.
I've had conversations with town council about certain matters that aren't appropriate to this bill here, so it's gotta be very specifically delineated as to what we're being charged for and how much. And if I don't agree with it, we'll file an appeal of the decision. But that's, I cannot agree to carte blanche and just whatever. Do I think you got sound advice from town council? Absolutely. But, and this is just a number. 'Cause I wasn't party to all those conversations. I didn't ask you to retain town council. I didn't get to pick town council. I didn't get to negotiate their bill. I just got to, get stuck with it. But give me a number and we'll either agree or disagree. That's all we've asked all along.
So as far as town council, looking at just that item now, I guess what are your thoughts in terms of itemizing that kind of thing? Or
Well, I
know-
can tell you, that anything that I've given advice to on the ZBA matters is being separately billed to ZBA versus the planning board. In a situation like this, the applicant may be asked to help towards, pay our fee for help with the decision. Not necessarily any other conversations we may have had or advice given along the way. If the board were so inclined, we could limit it to just the time that I've spent helping with the decision. How you wanna handle tonight's meeting, I leave to you on that one. And I didn't add up my time exactly for how much time I spent on the decision, but I can tell you it doesn't exceed 3 hours.
So I think what's reasonable is the efforts that went towards drafting and contribution to the product of the special permit. Because we do have a right under state law to hire consultants or to hire counsel to assist us with the special permit, and we do have a right to bill that back to you. And we absolutely should not do it for things that are not reasonable. I think we're all in agreement on that. Questions that we have about the TCA in general, I don't think that's something that we should bill back, but like I think we've spoke about here, there are things that are reasonable. So I think the idea of doing a itemized bill by or else setting some kind of not to exceed is the way to go, if that's reasonable.
I'm
So-
amenable to either one of those.
So when would be reasonable to do an itemized bill by?
5 days?
Well, I'm just asking, do you want just the hours spent on the decision? Do you wanna include tonight? Because
Why don't we say drafting the decision, I should
Oh,
speak
go
out of
ahead,
turn
Alice.
maybe, but, drafting and drafting the decision and finalizing it, cause they're two different things, so she's gotta go back and put these changes in, right? And attending tonight's meeting.
Yeah, this was tonight's meeting was 2 hours of active preparation.
And then say to be itemized and presented to applicant within 5 days, or 5 business days.
5 calendar days,
5 calendar days.
because the appeal period is 20 days.
Okay, yep,
calendar.
okay.
Let's say Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, yeah.
So Monday.
No. Assuming we're to get a decision tonight, 5 days from the date of the vote, so 5 days from.
Is that okay with you?
that's fine.
Would that language work?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so
And
that
then
is-
for the Places Associates, put payee, or however you're gonna say it, Places Associates for the services itemized in his letter dated September 21, 22. Cost not to exceed $3,800, which is the total of these fees.
scope and costs, not to exceed. Cause it's a defined scope, so if I have to spend eight hours on site.
Okay, scope and cost not to exceed. Well, the services as listed, how would you where would you put the scope into that?
Well, okay, yep, yeah, that's fine, services as listed, yeah.
As listed. Okay. Cost not to exceed. So if something else comes up, you gotta come back and gotta figure out how you're gonna get paid on that.
I know that story.
Everything he says is true about the solar fields. We've had them. But you have very detailed plans about the seating and the loam and everything, that I think
We've never had an issue.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I have been in many towns where I have gone behind the solar fields. And I've heard that many times before, and I understand your concern. Our engineers are far better and more experienced, and we've never had issues.
Yeah, we have solar fields as a practical matter. I'm not even sure who currently owns some of them because they get securitized.
I recognize your issues with the solar fields. I've heard them before.
So-
Never with us.
So we have language here, draft language of an entire, special permit. Including that proposed language for number 8, as a not to exceed. And the town council invoice to be within 5 calendar days. So, with that being said,
Ready for a motion and a vote?
well, let's talk about this procedurally for a minute. So, this is still the public hearing. Do we close the public hearing before calling for?
You should, yes,
We have
Okay.
to, yes.
yes.
So we'll need a motion.
Do you wanna see if there's, since the public hearing hasn't
Oh.
been closed yet, do you wanna see if there's any public,
Yep.
Well, the public hearing has been closed.
it was closed?
Yeah,
last
well,
time?
we closed the public comment period by vote at
Okay.
the last hearing.
Okay, then you
because
don't need to do that again.
We've had over 8 hours or so of,
But you haven't closed the hearing, just the
but we
public
haven't
comment.
closed the public hearing. Yeah, we closed the comment, but not the
Then
hearing.
close the hearing.
Okay.
Okay, then I'd like to make a motion that we close the public hearing.
And do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, let's have a roll call vote. And all members at the table are eligible to vote.
Demelia, aye?
Livedall, aye. Erica Dack, aye.
Steiger, aye.
Monroe, aye. Alright, so that is closing the public hearing.
Oh, the signature page.
So are we considering the draft now finalized with all these changes, or we still have issues?
Well, that's what we're discussing. I think we have, if we have closed out the major issues, or else we've built in ways for those issues to be addressed. So I think we are looking at the draft as noted in the record, as read out loud.
So are we ready for a motion to?
Yeah, I think we're ready for a
I'm gonna
motion.
take a stab at it, but I'll take revisions and discussions and whatever anybody wants to amend it. So I move that the planning board grant a special permit and site plan approval as requested by Vertex Towers LLC for the construction of a wireless communication facility, cell tower, at 14 Main Street on the terms and conditions of the draft decision as revised, presented tonight.
Okay, hearing a motion, do we have a second?
I will second that motion.
Okay, hearing a motion and second, discussion.
I think this merits some discussion, and only from the perspective that we do have members of the public here. And I will take the bull by the horns. I do understand that the public has expressed opinions, both in favor and against. And I just wanna explain that the way the board has to work here is really looking at all of the different matters that came in front of it and compare it against what the bylaw says. I know there's significant oppositions by members of, people who are here. The board here has to really look at this here from, does the applicant meet the requirements as they have been presented by the bylaw? I will be honest with you, I think we've seen several emails from other constituents who've come in and said, you know, they have no right to you know, Vertex has no right to put any towers up and so forth. I mean, these are individuals who have not read the bylaws and really don't understand what the bylaws are, and I think everybody who is here has read the bylaws, and they understand what the bylaws actually say. We are here regardless as to whether or not we are subjectively or objectively in favor or against this here. But we really have to look at this here in terms of how it is actually being presented to the members of the board, and whether or not the criteria are met, and or all of the items that are being presented, say for example by Places and Associates as the consultant who's providing us with the services, or even by council, have circumstances that would allow us to deny this here. We also have to take into consideration the benefit that cell towers do provide into the community at large. I mean, I speak as an individual. I depend on cell service at this point in time personally, and I know a lot of other people have mentioned that too. And so I'm not talking as a consumer here, but I'm talking about other individuals who have presented their case at large for the purposes of what the benefit is to them. And it also goes from not just the benefit that we have as individuals for communicating with somebody, say for example by phone, like my grandmother or my child or anybody like that, but also for safety issues. And I think from that perspective we need to take that into consideration. My vote will reflect that, but I think I want to make sure that the public here understands and knows that this is the way that we here as the planning board have to evaluate this here. We're not evaluating this here subjectively, we're really looking at this here quite objectively. And I think this has been mentioned several times in the past. It's been a very, very contentious arguments back and forth, and very good arguments presented by many of the individuals who have come here. And I want to say that I really appreciate the fact that we have constituents who have come here and have voiced concerns or have voiced appreciation for what is actually happening by somebody like Vertex to come in and provide these services, and others who have voiced very strong oppositions for various good reasons themselves. But again, I just want to make sure that we are educating our constituents in terms of what our role and responsibilities are here as a board. And I think this is very important for everybody to understand. It's hard for us to be in front of everybody and try to appease everybody. We can't do that. We have to make a very serious decision here, and we have to look at things very objectively. And that's the way that we individually are deciding. I'm speaking for myself as a member of this board. I've been on this board for 3 years. I'm starting to understand how difficult this is. And this is probably the hardest decision that I've had to vote on. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. Thank you.
Further comment from the board? So I would also like to take an opportunity to comment here. To echo some of Francois' points there. Our mission as a board is to look at the community impact, and there's always some community impact. We can't use a standard of no community impact. All we can do is manage the community impact that we have. And I do appreciate that there's been very passionate voices on both sides of the discussion for this project. And I thank everybody for showing up and presenting their arguments, because if this is a yes vote, it is a no vote, it's changed either way. The actual body of what the document is and how we've thought about this and how we've approach has changed based upon the feedback that we've gotten from everybody. I also wanted to specifically thank everybody on the board for their patience and work through this process, no matter which way it goes. I know I personally I've lost track of how many hours I've spent reading correspondence from the public, reading the law, reading this application. I've done more than 100 volunteer hours on this easy, and I know that other members of the board have done similar things under really extremely passionate feedback from the community on both sides of the issue, and I thank everybody for that, because I know it's been very tough on all of us for 4 months or so far. So I wanted to specifically call out and thank everybody on the board for sticking it out, because this has been a challenging process, no matter what the result is. I also wanted to thank Bill and Places Associates, because Bill's work has been invaluable in this, and I know there was certainly an issue over the fee. I'm happy we've all gotten through it, but I don't want any of the conversation that has come up with that to come away and say that we don't have faith in the quality of his work or the support that he's given us over the years. I also wanted to thank town council on this for fielding some late night phone calls and such, and helping us work through what has really been a mountain of extremely complex issues. And that is about all I have to add for discussion from the board for myself. Anybody else have anything to add from the board? All right, hearing no further discussion, calling a roll call vote, and Erica, you are on deck for this.
Erica Dack, aye.
Alice Lithell, aye.
John Demelia, aye.
Franz Versteiger, aye.
And Monroe, aye.
Wow.
All right, that is that. And I did see your hand up.
You've already voted, so,
Okay.
where do we stand on the shot clock, with telecommunications?
That is up to the ZBA and town council, and the planning board doesn't have any.
No, I'm talking about the shot clock for the planning board.
It is a moot issue for the planning board.
Can I ask town council a question?
I prefer you do it after the meeting.
Okay.
Okay. All right, well, thank you to the board for that. There is still some meeting left for us, but, we'll give you guys some time.
Can I say something off the record? I recognize the fact.
We're on TV, so it's not off the record.
Well, I understand, but I recognize the fact that you're all volunteers. I think you did yeoman's work. You handled this very professionally, and I also thank you very much for your effort. It's a tough place, and I appreciate all the effort.
Good night, everyone, thank you.
Good night, thanks for
Good
coming.
night.
Good night.
I have a lot more to cover.
Yeah, so
thanks
there's,
for this continues.
there's not a bunch to go through, but the next one is, Mr. Steiger provides an update on the walkthrough of 26 Worcester Road.
Boy, focus is on me now. So I had the opportunity this past Saturday to do a site visit of 26 Worcester Road. We had a meeting several weeks ago, I think it may have been about a month and a half ago, with Mary Ann Pinto from Three Oaks Associates, I believe is their name, and you all have a
With the Craig residence?
Pardon me?
Is this the Crane
Crane,
residence?
yeah.
It is the Crane,
The
Crane
Castro,
property,
former
which used to be the Catystos, and it's Three Oaks Environmental, and I apologize. Marion Pinto is, the person who's, providing, the clay pit restoration advice to, Alan Crane. What I'm presenting here is not a, I'm just providing really an objective, view of what I found when I was, at the site. I will indicate that 3 years ago in 2019, I think it was, Alice, you and I visited
Yeah.
the location. Was there anybody else? And I think, yeah, Bill.
Yeah.
There was nobody else from the planning board. I don't think Bill
I
Holman's.
think that's right.
Okay.
And
So
the
we
Tastos came
visited the location at that point in time. There is in the, I did include a report that is in the, that's up on the website. You are all welcome to read it. I have both a PDF and a Word formatted, document. I will say this here, the location is, well known, to us because, the Catystos have, been here, before. It is I think it's a depleted, clay pit, in the sense that there's really no more extraction that can be taken out. When we visited the place back in 2019 versus what I saw this time around, and again, I don't have photographs from the time when I, went to visit it. I don't know if you have any,
I didn't
you
take them
did
yet.
have any at that point in time.
Built it.
Sorry?
He said he did.
Bill-
You
Bill
took
may have,
pictures?
I did.
Okay. Well, it might be very interesting and good for me to, share the pictures that I recently took, and if you can share the ones that we had from that point in time, so that we can maybe do some form of a comparison, that would be great. I did include in the report a, view of the pit as it is, shown, on the GIS maps. And, the first thing that I will, note is that, when you approach the pit at this point in time, you take immediately a right turn and you get into the open area, which is where I parked. There currently are, appear to be like 4, spent or junked, vehicles there, in a box, in a flatbed trailer, a large bulldozer, which I recall was there also from, Mr. Cataisto, who had it back in the day. I did also observe that there was construction, waste and in various locations, there. I'm just observing, I'm not judging it, I'm just simply saying that's what I saw and that's what I found. From my recollection, back in 2019 versus what I saw this time around, I saw very few changes. And what I mean by that is when you walk into the area, it's not like it's suddenly very wooded or anything of that nature. It's still very barren in so many areas. There are areas that are completely denuded, from vegetation. And more importantly, I saw that there was some significant surface scarring. The scarring was, as a result of what appeared to be either tire trucks or truck tires or, four-wheelers or something else. I did notice, and I did take a photograph that I included, of a four-wheeler, that apparently had been abandoned or was non-functional. And Mrs. Marianne Pinto had indicated that I believed, or she believed that this was, something that, the property owner or a member of the property owner had left there. And again, I'm not passing judgment, I'm just simply stating the fact of what I saw there. The pit is still surrounded by a number of berms, most of which appear to have still a very steep incline. And there's a significant sign of erosion in some of these here. And what I mean by that is you see, the berm, and then you see pockets of areas where, water seems to have come down, and, which would indicate to me that there's erosion that is taking place. Mrs. Pinto indicated that many of these berms are would be used by birds, for nesting, and she mentioned several birds. I will say that, when I was there, I saw no no birds or no nests. And I pointedly asked her as to whether or not there were any at this point in time there. She did say no. That there could be some in the future, absolutely a possibility, but it's certainly not something that I was able to witness. At the lowest point of the pit, which we did actually descend to, there is some vegetation there. It was very moist. We did have significant rains the week before, and there seems to be again from the berm, the water that would fall down or would basically drop down to some of these lower points would definitely seem to collect in this particular location. Saw a significant amount of wildlife tracks, and what I mean by that would be turkey tracks, deer tracks, and what seemed to be a bear track also. And they seem to be using this one direction back and forth to go between two wooded areas. As I said, the area does contain some vegetation, including some grasses. There's some native vegetation that Mrs. Pinto had indicated, some of which would be considered to be very interesting species. I will also, however, point out that she did indicate that there were some invasive species in the area, one of which she indicated was, like, for example, invasive white pine. We walked into a wooded area that is located about 100 feet west of the entrance of the clay pit. This area is definitely fairly thickly wooded, and according to Mrs. Pinto, may be the result of it being totally undisturbed for the last 10 to 20 years. I mentioned this here because, again, she indicated that there's a potential for vegetation to grow and take over. I did, however, find that, again, this is just an area that is past the berm, and there's a big, I observed a big round pipe, drainage pipe, and this drainage pipe was probably about a diameter of roughly about 2 feet, and it spans the length of, I wouldn't say more than 20 feet under this berm to get from one side to the other, where it actually goes out onto a bed, what appears to be a bed of rocks, and then there's some incline down, and it appears that this is, it carries the runoff water, if there were any runoff water, away from that lowest point in the pit where we were, and it would seem to be carrying it out to a neighbor's property, which I believe would be 28, I'm assuming would be 28 Worcester Road. Again, I'm not a surveyor, I didn't do any assessment of there, but that's some of the things that I noticed here. General observations again is I did not see a lot of changes from our last visit, which was roughly about 3 years ago. The main concern that I would bring up for us to keep an eye on here is the fact that there is what appears to be abandoned trucks there, which would be, I think, a violation of the general bylaws that we have here in Hubbardston. These are unregistered vehicles. There was some building and construction material there. And again, big concern for me was the fact that there's quite a lot of what appear to be tire tracks, and there seems to be a significant amount of scarring. The reason I'm also bringing this up, if this is an area that is supposed to be ready to be regenerated as a natural habitat, the fact that there is such active traffic going there would be something to keep in mind as we are doing any kind of future review of this here. And that is it.
Thank you for that report. So, I guess I have procedural questions on this. The first one being is, I thought I remembered seeing something in the bylaws that specifically said that a formal application had to be filed for this.
So what? I can't hear you.
That a
Formal
formal
application.
application had to be filed if we were to consider waiving a bond, but now I can't find it. Is anybody familiar with that existing? What would even our procedural basis
I think-
be?
So, what happened here originally was the restoration plan didn't go forward with the Closeout because it depended on this manufactured topsoil from the Irving paper mill, which got shut down. And I don't know whether it's being, but anyway, that was a legitimate reason, right?
Yep.
So, at that point, I mean, they could have come back and modified it, right? And they could still come back and modify it. But I do think that the bond was for the town to restore the permit if they didn't, you know, the land if they didn't comply, right? So I think they need to come back with, and not just say, I want my money back, but actually have to submit a revised, closure permit, right?
So a modification of the restoration plan,
Right.
does that make sense, Ben?
Yep.
And it
So-
does have the bylaw has, it has both regulations and the bylaw, right, that
Yep.
apply to this. And it has, and they can ask for waivers of stuff, right? So for example, one of them was you can't have these steep slopes that present a danger, right? If
Yep.
they now say, well, there are trees growing up and it's wild sanctuary, they can say, this is our sanctuary area and we're asking for this,
For
a waiver from this slope or that slope. But they have to come back with something, they have to
Yeah.
come back with a
Right.
revised,
Can't just say we don't wanna do it.
and we
give us
want our
back
money back. So I think our position should be, they don't get their money back until there's some revised plan we can at least consider, and maybe,
Well, we gotta follow what the rules are, so if procedurally it is, they need to come back and ask for a request of modification of restoration plan, then that is what it is. So my follow-up question to that would be, that sounds like the kind of thing we're gonna need consulting support with. So,
I'll
what,
give you names.
what do we need to do to make sure we are all set for billing on that ahead of time?
They gotta make an application to you.
Okay, so, I guess what we'd be looking at, they would submit the application, I would ask Mark at that point to work with you, in terms of coming up with a proposal, and I would suggest that we put that proposal in their hands before we even have them in for a hearing.
So I know Mary Ann DePinto.
Mhm.
She actually was a planning board member. She worked at DEP for a very long time. With the board's permission, at no cost,
Mhm.
I will call her and summarize this discussion, because I don't think that they wanna hire a surveyor and an engineer to do a plan,
Mhm.
in as much as I think that they are proposing that they can do it with an existing plan and a narrative to go with it. Because as I understand their position, and I'm not representing it, I'm just saying I believe their position is, it's naturalizing itself, it's creating unique habitat, and it shouldn't be man-modified any further to enhance this reforestation naturalization of the pit. And I think I can phrase that to her in a way to describe, you need to give us goalposts, you need to identify, as you said, what are the enhanced habitat areas, and what's with the four-wheelers and how does that work with that? What's with the trash vehicles, how does that work with an enhancement plan? So that they have at least an idea of what I think I'm hearing from you, if that's okay.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
I mean,
I
they
think
could
time-
they could go back through the permit we had issued, right?
Yeah.
And mark it up,
Yeah,
but I don't think they should, I mean, one of the things was to remove the junk. There are things that we're not gonna waive in that.
Yeah.
and I understand, there are certain types of swallows that burrow into sand, not clay, to make their nests, and they want vertical cliffs that other animals can't climb. But on the other hand, it's a man-made cliff and it's unsafe.
It is, yeah. It appeared to be unsafe because it took us quite a bit of an effort to get from top to the bottom and then vice
Yep.
versa.
So I wanna try to avoid going too far down into a substantive discussion without having them here for it, just out of
Agreed.
fairness.
Yeah.
But I think what we're talking about with Bill is the right answer here. And then if it sounds like they wanna go forward, then we're gonna need an application, figure out what we're gonna need to do and what's gonna cost.
I'd say also, I mean, important to look at here is it's a timeline. And what I mean by that is it's such a restoration,
Yeah.
I guess we need to understand what are we talking about this timeline? Is this a 30-year restoration effort, 10-year restoration effort?
Goalposts, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is very, very important here,
Yeah.
because it's not gonna happen instantaneously.
It's not gonna happen if they got four-wheelers running all over the place.
Well, that's a
Yeah.
different issue, I'm just observing what I saw there, and.
Well, I'm rendering an
What-
opinion.
Yeah.
Well, that's heading down the substantive road.
Yeah.
Further than I wanna go. So I'm happy to call that reasonably satisfied. Matters not reasonably anticipated by the chair, yeah, I don't have any at this point.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh,
No.
no, I guess, go ahead.
No.
Okay, for next month, I am not planning on calling the first meeting of the month.
That's where I was gonna go.
I would like to take a little bit of time off from everyone, and I think we all deserve it. It's been a long few months.
I agree.
We'll resume on the third Thursday.
Just so you know, I was told by Paper Crane that they're going to file a site plan modification imminently.
Excellent. So we'll certainly look at that
On the third
You got time.
Thursday of
on the
October.
third Thursday.
You got time.
Well, and my other reasoning for doing that is Mark's just getting caught up to speed, and I think we need to build some robustness into our administrative processes to avoid some of the issues that we had with this most recent special permit. And that's gonna give us some time to do that, cause right now I'm already asking way too much of him for what he's doing.
I have some permitting flowcharts for special permit, site plan, subdivision, A&R. Want me to PDF those over to you?
Yeah. That-
They're
Very
good for
helpful.
you all too.
Yep.
Yeah.
That'd be very helpful.
That'd be super helpful.
I was just gonna mention, and if you're not gonna mention it, it's the results of the town meetings, and what has been approved by the AG and what is still pending. If you can just quickly
Oh, yeah,
let
absolutely.
everybody know, because I think it's important.
The Attorney General's office has asked for additional time to continue reviewing our bylaw changes from the last town meeting.
No,
The
just
only
one of
one.
them, just
Oh,
the
only one.
best.
Oh, just the best?
Just the
Okay,
best, they
so just the
approved
best.
our accessory dwelling unit bylaw.
My mistake, excuse me.
And they requested an extension to November 12th, if I,
Right, they have a
Believe-
right to go to a
I can't
certain
remember
date.
if it's the 12th or the 21st.
No,
I'm
I-
being dyslexic.
I think it's the 12th.
Yeah.
It's
So-
November the 12th.
Yeah.
So also, in sort of keeping with that, I have finally put in all the revisions to the bylaw that were sort of agreed by town council.
Great.
And there are left few little remaining questions, some formatting issues, but it's been sent back. But I haven't, there are things that are too big a jump for, that require, votes on the town floor, and we're not gonna make it in time for this meeting, cause I prioritized getting the rest of it finalized, so people have a reasonably accurate document to read. I thought it was the more important of the two goals.
Yeah, the original discussion was that the next special town meeting was going to be late in November. It turns out it's gonna be late in October, so it really kinda cuts our window off to try to put anything in on it.
Cause you would have to have a hearing and so on,
Yeah,
on
and
bylaw changes, so.
yeah, and ultimately, the reason that we're doing this work right now is because when you rush to try to get stuff in, you sometimes make mistakes. And the whole point of doing this is to get rid of some of those mistakes, so let's not rush to get it in. So,
But do we have pieces that are not required to go to,
A
town
lot
meeting?
of them, many of the changes,
And-
they
and-
said
and-
could fit under that umbrella of,
That would be great, because I still think that we owe it to the town to ensure that we have a copy of the zoning bylaw
Yeah.
online,
One-
that people can
It's
reference.
correct. You're right.
110%. I think
Right,
it's
right.
unreasonable that
This
the
will
only way to
get
get our
us-
zoning bylaws is to email the town clerk. So, we certainly need to get on that. Alright, anything else for matters not anticipated? Administrative matters, I'm gonna forego reviewing the long-term project and issue exhibit, but everybody should take a look at that, and if you have stuff to add, please let me know, because you can tell me about that under the scheduling exception from the open meeting law, if you have stuff you'd like me to schedule. additional public comments? Any additional comments from the public? And,
The masked
Yeah.
public.
Don't have anybody on, right?
there are no blinky icons, so, yes. So, no public comments online, so with that said, would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second the motion.
Hearing a motion and a second, no discussion on this one, let's have a vote.
Steiger, aye?
Demalia, aye.
Looked alike.
Monroe, aye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Well done.
Francois.